One, two, 1, 2. Let's get into it, good people. It's your boy Carcino here, and let's talk about the Janet Jackson documentary, or whatever she want to call that. I wanted to wait till both parts was over before I start speaking on all the issues. You know, people are going to take certain points out and start talking about, certain parts that they like. I've seen people talk about the Jermaine Dupri. But let's talk about some of the things that were revealed in the documentary or the Lifetime docu series about Janet. Now, I will go into further detail on the Patreon about the secret baby rumor between her and the DeBarge. What I will tell you will shock you. Now, here's what some of the problems were. With this documentary, it was controlled by Janet Jackson, 100%. She had to watch the documentary first before it's aired. She was the producer. She wanted to make sure everything was, she had total control and final say before it was released to the general public. Now, with that being said, and please hit the like button, we will go into some details to cover certain aspects of what happened during during this docu-series. They showed a lot. Of course, they were going to talk about the racism she experienced when she went to California and was going to school. And it was shocking to me that people thought that Randy Jackson was the baby. I'm like, Randy was the baby brother. I'm like, he was in the Jacksons. Like, Randy, Michael, and Janet are the three youngest out of the children. So those three were together a lot. And it's Marlon and Michael that was like really close. And like Randy and Michael, Randy was the little brother and she was in between them. Like, she's the baby girl. She's the last child between, Catherine and Joe. Was Janet. So when this was done, this is back when people had large families. When this process was done and it was, what it became a unforeseeable situation here. Meaning that a lot of things were considered to be unattainable for her. Growing up, being a little chubby kid. And, of course your brothers are going to call you names and name you Piggy and all this stuff. That's what brothers do. But she's like, it had an effect on me growing up and all of this stuff and blah, blah, blah. All right, so all of that's going to come into play. That's the natural upbringing. What was shocking to some people that I've seen on Twitter was like, man, I thought they named that street Jackson Street after the Jacksons. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. It just shows you how little people know about the actual Jacksons, period. But then again, some people are very young, so I can't blame them for that. So I don't know the age of the people that's on Twitter, but I thought that was a known fact that they lived on Jackson Street when when they got there, and I thought people probably seen the Jacksons documentary, the Jacksons movie. I just thought all of these things that people would know. Now, when we look at the situation as far as Joe and her career, she's a daddy's girl. When the brothers were basically firing him for being the manager of the Jacksons, like saying we don't want Joe to be our manager anymore. He was out to prove them wrong. He wanted to prove that, okay, I got this thing here. I'm in control of this, and I'm going to make Janet the biggest star in the world. So Janet was going to go to law school, and she wanted to be a lawyer and all this stuff. And Joe wanted to push her into the industry because Joe wanted to make her into a star. And he wanted to prove his managerial skills. Like she said, he got her to audition for Good Times. He got her that audition to go in and audition for it. And he got her for Penny. Then he got her to go in to audition for Fame on the TV show Fame. And she didn't want to do it. But he got her to go in and do it. Well, wanting to have control over her own life, she went and married James DeBarge. Now, the older brother, I believe was Bobby, was dating Latoya, and that's how Janet and the DeBarge families, they were singing families back then. So for me, this is like not known, unknown news. The DeBarge and Jackson family knew each other. They're all singing families. There were a ton of singing families. I come from a family of singing families. My uncles all were singing in a band called the Chambers of Time. My uncle is performing tonight. He's still performing, and he's like 68 years old. He's performing tonight, actually. So this comes along with the territory with our family. Is performing, giving a performance, and all my uncles was in the band. They almost made it to they had their one album come out. So a lot of bands at that time were family or best friends with the drummer. Keyboard music was very huge in the schools back then. That's why they've taken them out of schools, so that most of these kids don't have an outlet, and they learn how to create talent, because you can get a job in the music industry playing keyboard, playing drums. You can go into studio sessions and play drums and make a living doing that for years. You can play the bass, bring in a bass guitar, and you could go into studios and make money just playing bass for somebody's album. You can learn something that can help make you money without having to make an album. So there's a lot of stuff that was left out of this thing, and we'll probably talk about that on the docu series. Um, Well, it's kind of hard to understand, but she was detailing without talking about Bobby Brown. Because a lot of people was like, "Where's Bobby?" And I heard a lot of people on Twitter screaming about "Where's Bobby?" She talked about Bobby Brown, but she knew she couldn't say Bobby Brown. When you're doing these type of docu series, you can't throw other people's names around really if they're not part of the project, because then they take on a life of their own and they start coming out making statements and all this stuff. So she did it tastefully and said, "I had a thing, for enabling drug addicts." So that was basically her way of covering what she was dealing with in that situation. Like, she was basically attracted to people who wind up being drug addicts. The DeBarge, James DeBarge, the whole brothers, and it was crazy. Like she said, they'd be fighting, rolling on the floor because she's trying to flush the pills down the toilet. But there's a lot of stuff that was left out. And we are going to go into that on that Patreon. And it will be explosive. Very explosive. You're gonna learn a lot. Now, what she said about the secret child, and she talked in code, she never used the word no. There wasn't a child. She made sure she never said that. It was so strategically done, and how she answered the question. It left the door open for anybody who's smart to know that she's being evasive. Really. She's answering the question, but being evasive by saying, "How could I do that? I would never do that. Hide the child from the father. I could never do that." Because James believed it too, because in his mind, he believed that she was pregnant. Now, and that's when the family went to annul the marriage and all these other things that was going on. And they wanted to get all of that removed, and they were married less than a year. Then her long-term marriage with her director, the guy who basically controlled her life. She always gets in these marriages with these guys that control her life, and they have all this control over her and pushing her in all these directions. The Rolling Stone cover, and we all loved it, but her family's like, "Janet, what is this?" But her husband knew best. He was a good director. He looked at her basically as a product, and he had a pill addiction, and she couldn't deal with it. And eventually, they had to split. But all of these agreements had to be made before her to make this documentary, because it went more into her and Michael relationship, kind of strained once Thriller took off, and he was in a whole different spectrum after that. And their relationship kind of went their separate ways. Because her debut album, that Janet Jackson album, flopped. She didn't want to have Jackson on there. She wanted to be called Janet because she didn't want to be associated with, "Oh, okay, this is the Jackson's daughter." She wanted to be her own thing. So that's when Control came out. The lyrics, everything is about Janet. I want to be the one in control. She was taking control of her life. She had Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. That was a great team all the way up, working together. Yeah, and it shows her and Michael working on Scream. And when you push Michael Jackson to want to use the F word, you know you didn't piss him off. Stop effing with me, makes me wanna scream. I'm like, Mike, man, stop pressuring me. Now, the thing about this documentary that's supposed to bring her back, and it's supposed to tell the true story, her truth. Finally, for the first time, we get to hear Janet, right? So, when you hear Janet, and as people watching it around the world was captivated by it, and Twitter was going crazy, and she went through her early days, and her brothers. She went back to Gary, and she see the mural of her brothers. She started crying. It showed her like people didn't like. Oh, look at that! She's so touched seeing her brothers up there like that. Well, her first album wasn't great. It just wasn't. It's not her fault. It just wasn't any songs on there that popped. And Joe was the one that was in control of her life at the time and choosing the type of music for her to make. And when she got with Paul Abdul, that's when things changed for her. When they started doing choreography, she was a Laker girl and she was talented as a choreographer and doing all these different moves and dances and performing. So when she started doing this with Janet, then she broke out and had her own career for a while. So it was quite incredible that you got to see the growth of Janet Jackson in this documentary. As when you get older, you reflect on a lot of things, but you admit she admitted a lot of things in her life. Like when she started going to Jermaine Dupri, and everybody freaked out over this. Jermaine Dupri cheated. And she's like, I heard that he was cheating on me, and how you gonna cheat on Janet Jackson? So this frog face toad, they've been bashing him. They was like, I don't believe this. Eric Benet's cheating on Holly Berry, and Janet Jackson getting cheated on by Jermaine Dupri. He should be thankful Janet let him in the room. So this was the going thing throughout his relationship, and he was like, "Yeah, because I'm dating Janet Jackson. Women are like throwing themselves at." But once again, we're gonna get into the deep of this on the Patreon. So put a pin in that. All of this is gonna be on the Patreon version, and it is going to be shocking, and is going to reveal what she should have said in this documentary. Now the next thing, Justin Timberlake. Oh, you guys wanted to talk about Timberlake. Oh, she's really changed her whole shirt now. Now her whole shirt has changed. Justin is now somebody they talk, they're friends with, and everything else, because she couldn't publicly come out and say, how they screwed her over and how Justin basically left her out to dry when he put out a statement when she told him not to say anything. All he had to do was don't say nothing. And he was so young, he didn't know what to do. And they was like, they'll come after you in this business and try to end you. So just don't say anything. But we'll go into that as well. As she spoke about, because she went to go, because her brother had an incident, right? Because he had an incident that went on in his controversy, that ruined her Coca-Cola deal. Coca-Cola pulled the plug, said, nah, we not doing it. And because she went to go side with Michael and help Michael, so Renee Alonso, I don't think it's Zondo, I believe his name is. He was a talented director, but he looked at Janet as an object, and she's used to having someone control her. She's not used to making, like, she did the song Control, but she's somebody who was a daddy's girl, so she needed that support system to be there to instruct her of what to do. That guide her. That was the way she that was the way she lived her life. But like I told you, we got way more to discuss on this documentary thing on there. Stefania is not her daughter, never was her daughter. She looks like Janet. That's Reeby's daughter. I believe that's Reeby's daughter. That's her niece. That is not her. Stefania, no. Stefania Jackson, if I'm not mistaken, I think Stefania is, that's either Randy's or Riri's kid. But that's her family. That's not it's not her daughter. She just resembles like she's a Jackson. So she's gonna look like them. But no, that's not that's not the case. But we're gonna get into that on the Patreon, and yeah, it would be explosive. I believe it is. Without a doubt, I already know. Just thinking about it right now, I'm like, yeah, might get in trouble. But yeah, that's about it for me. It was entertaining to listen to. I didn't really learn too much, but I'm quite sure a lot of you guys did. So I'm out.